I am Melanie Morse. I'm a pediatric psychologist here at UVA. I work with a couple different medical subspecialty teams here and on the inpatient side, seeing patients and families and supporting through a number of different things that may be going on in one's life. And I'm excited to talk with you all today about tips for helping kids cope when the world feels scary. And I really want to kind of frame this as how we support emotional safety in an uncertain world. So, just a couple things to get us started and oriented here. Closed captions are available on Zoom, so if that is a feature you are looking for, hit that button, put in the chat if you have any issues with that, and we will help you sort it out. But that is something that is available if needed. And then in terms of what to expect today, so I will do just a little bit of talking and we'll be recording this to be posted online, so you can always go back and revisit the talk portion of today's webinar. And then you can, as we go through, put questions in the chat if you have questions that come along, and we will definitely go through those after the talk. If you have questions at the end, like once the recording is over, you can unmute yourself as well. We can figure that out. That portion of the Q&A piece is not going to be recorded. So I hope everyone feels open and we are happy to have some candid conversations. If you have a question, we would love to hear it and kind of talk through what some good ideas might be for that. Okay, so jumping right in. When I think about, how we support kids through difficult things that are going on in the world, I think about what are the kinds of things that could be coming up or happening for our patients and families. So I thought I'd start us off with a scenario. So we've got a parent driving their child to school when a scary news story comes on the radio. So from the back seat, you hear your child ask, "Could that happen here?" Or "Is that something that could happen to me?" And how we respond to that really matters because kids are picking up on what they hear, on what they see, what the adults around them feel, um, even if nothing is said. Kids are observers, they are learning from you, they are learning from the people around them, and they're trying to piece together, what this means. And so we have some options for what we can do with that, which is the good news here. So in the moment, what can really help when something like that comes up? So it can always be nice to pause and take a breath and kind of just regulate yourself through breathing. And parents can model that for their kids. So you can kind of show that and say like, "Ooh, that is a scary thing. I want to kind of take a couple of breaths here. I want to kind of regulate myself, calm myself down because that's got my heart really going right now." Um, Focus in on answering what is being asked of you. Um, Validate what you're hearing. Oh, it makes sense to feel that way. That's a scary thing to think about. And then provide some reassurance. You're safe. I'm here. It's the adult's job to make sure that we're taking care of you and make sure that you stay safe. So kind of giving that like, you're noticing, you're listening, and then you're giving that reassurance. And we'll talk a little bit more about pieces of this too as we go along. So, what counts as bad things? I'm sure if we think about a list, it could be pretty long. But as I was thinking about some of this and thinking about what practically are things that we may experience on a day to day, or we may hear about, our kids' friends are experiencing, or we may hear about on TV. So, I think community violence is certainly something that could be triggering or traumatic. Illness or death, fears of deportation or immigration, and what that could look like, bullying, racism and discrimination, war. There's tons of different bad things that could happen. And so in these moments when kids are asking, "Are we safe?" We don't have to have the perfect answer for those things because it is legitimately scary to think about some of these things happening, of course. But we don't have to give the perfect answers. We have to show that we want to do our best to show that we're safe adults and we're there to provide that safe base and help our kids get through it. So as I was thinking about kind of another important piece of this, I think it might be helpful to kind of talk through a bit of how kids experience stress and bring in that developmental lens. So some of the things that came to mind for me is the caveat that stress isn't just emotional. It can be really a whole body experience. I talk a lot with patients and families about how we hold stress and anxiety and fear in our body. And even when we may not be able to kind of say like, oh yeah, I'm feeling stressed right now, our body still may be kind of having some response to that. And so definitely there is that physical component, and that's something to be aware of that kids might experience. We also know that a component of stress in response to stress is this fight, flight, freeze response. So, what are you going to do in the moment? Are you going after the stressor? Are you, trying to get away from it as fast as possible? Or are you really just triggered and you can't do much in that moment? And then we know that there's also that biological component, thinking about some different brain structures that are involved in how we process stress. And of course, stress hormones, thinking about the role of cortisol. So there's a couple different pieces that are important to consider. And I think it's also important to consider the role of acute stress versus chronic stress. So things that maybe happen like one time versus things that are chronic, ongoing events, considerations, these types of things. Because certainly any kind of stressor can be challenging and scary. But many people might describe the experience of a one-time stressor as different than something that they're kind of experiencing continually at a certain level. So that's a piece of this as well. We know the research shows that chronic stress tends to have more impact over time on a number of things, including things like our health. So it's definitely important to be aware of that caveat. And I promise this is not a neuroscience talk, but I did want to just kind of give a frame of stress in our brains and what this stress brain loop looks like. So I'm sure any of you all can think of a time. I mean, I know I can, when you were feeling stressed and maybe it was hard to sleep and you didn't get a great night's sleep that night. And then the next day, maybe you had a number of things you needed to do and it was harder to focus. You hadn't slept well. I know in those moments I will say, one of the things I reach for is sweets, and then that kind of throws off my nutritional balance for the day. And so just kind of being aware of that stress brain loop um, is important, because for kids, this can be really confusing. Like as adults, we can often reflect on this and say like, oh man, I didn't sleep well last night. I was stressed. Like I need to really be sure today. Like I always feel my best when I get great nutrition. So I really want to prioritize that today. But that may be confusing or difficult for kids to disentangle. And so being aware of this so you can help support when you're noticing these kind of loops come through is really helpful, because we know that there is the role of kind of how our brain is responding to this, and giving kids a little bit of grace. Maybe it's harder to focus after a stressful event. Maybe it's harder to study for that spelling test. Maybe it's harder to follow through on our chores, and just being mindful like, oh yeah, well, something really scary happened, and let's take that into consideration when we're noticing that we're having some difficulties or challenges today. So thinking about the impact of scary things, triggers, these types of things on kids, there's a couple different ways that this can show up. And of course, everyone experiences stress differently, and that acute versus chronic presentation can certainly play a role. But I thought it'd be important to highlight some of the emotional pieces. So things like anxiety getting louder, sadness, irritability, those are definitely considerations or things we might see post a scary event. Uh, Perhaps we might see some behavioral kind of presentations and changes there, maybe increased clinginess, increased aggression, more withdrawal, just maybe not being perhaps as interested in like playing games or doing other activities that might typically be something that your child is really into. Definitely some physical things can come up as well. Sleep problems, headaches, stomach aches, these types of things. Like I said, stress can really manifest in our body. And so that is certainly a piece of this too. So like we were talking about briefly with that kind of that stress loop in our brain, we know that when we're stressed, and particularly with kids who may not be able to have the insight or connection to really highlight, like, oh, this is what's going on, it makes it tricky and harder to be able to access our full attention and concentration, access things in terms of memory and recall, these kinds of things. School performance can decrease. We might see more behavioral disruptions. A stressed brain is not a brain that is ready for learning. It is a brain that is trying to make it through that moment, even when we don't necessarily recognize that connection. So in these times, what kids really need most from their caregivers, their family, other important adults in their lives is safety, developmentally appropriate honesty, and connection. So kids really want to know, I'm here, I'm listening, we can face this together. We're going to get through this together. It's the adult's job to make sure that you're safe right now, but I want to talk about how you're feeling because I really want to know so I can help you feel a little bit better and help us get through this together. Um, When I think about how we respond to, I think this kind of basic framework is a helpful way to center ourselves. So first, again, I hope it's clear that I realize these scary things can be tough, not just for kids, but for you all too, for everybody. And sometimes the first thing we have to do as a caregiver is to pause and regulate ourselves. Because if we can't provide that calm, safe base and be able to kind of take that beat to listen, it's going to be hard for our kids to see that that's a way we can respond. So if you need to take a quick break, if you need to get a sip of water, if you need to kind of slow your body down with breathing on your own before you kind of jump into that with your kids, do what you need to do. Um, and then you can ask what they know about a certain event, situation, whatever it is. Validate those feelings, provide simple, truthful information. So you don't need to get into the weeds of all the details, um, but just kind of give an overview of maybe what's going on or what happened, and then reassure safety when possible. Again, I like kind of coming back to that, like, well, the adults in your life are here to be sure that you're safe and taken care of, and we are always doing many, many things to make sure that's the case. So that is something for us to worry about. I did mention that the developmental piece of this is important too. So, when we've got our younger kids, like 3 to 7 or so, they can be really concrete about things and miss the nuance in certain things. So it can be very like this or that, kind of black or white thinking. Um, like why would this happen if it didn't happen other times kind of thing. So just being mindful of that and just kind of trying to meet your kids where they're at in terms of the way they're thinking and framing things. um, when kids get to be more school age, we've got a little bit more awareness, like ages 7 to 12, but they still need reassurance. So I think about kids, for example, who maybe come home from school and they do an active shooter drill at school, for example. And they come home and maybe they're like a little bit withdrawn. Maybe the younger kids are saying, like, oh, this thing happened at school. I don't know, like, I felt really scared. And then the school age kids are like, maybe why do we need to do this? And perhaps our teens who are, 12 to 18, more abstract thinking, more justice focused, are saying, this is really unfair. Why would this even be a thing that happens? This makes me so mad. So definitely the response can kind of change with the developmental stage. And of course, there are things, you know your kids best, that may play a role in how they think about things. If perhaps there have been other family members who've been through similar things, that can certainly shape how we think about stuff too, and how the family really talks about those things. So now that we've talked a bit about what to do, I want to also just be sure to touch on what not to do. So we don't want to avoid the topic. We don't want to give too much detail. Again, we don't need to get in the weeds on this stuff. We don't want to dismiss our kids' feelings and say something like, "Well, you're fine. Everything will be fine," because sometimes things are not fine. But what we can do is our best to keep our kids safe. And we don't want to provide over reassurance in an unrealistic fashion, like, oh, that would never happen. There would never be a shooting at school. That's just not possible because there could be. But again, circling back and really making that focus on like the adults are here to keep you safe. I'm here with you. I hear how you're feeling. What can we do to help feel a little bit better right now? And so kids may not know when you ask them, some kids may not, what they can do to feel better in that moment. So that's where you come in with that power of modeling. So, like I said at the beginning, kids read your emotions more than your words. They pick up on so much. Um, and being calm does not mean you're not having an emotional reaction to a really scary thing. Being calm shows that you can regulate your feelings and use coping strategies to get through those. So there's a couple different things we might do and consider to help manage stress for kids. So you might encourage some deep breathing. I like to do, with kids, we can do like roller coaster breathing, up your thumb, down your thumb, up your index finger, down your index finger, so on. I think hot cocoa breathing is really nice. Imagine breathing in, you smell the hot cocoa, you breathe nice and slow out and kind of cool the hot cocoa down. But deep breathing is a great way to really regulate your nervous system. Drawing, writing, just kind of having that creative outlet can be really good because it's a nice positive redirection, distraction, play, kind of same thing there. Um, Maintaining routine is another really important piece of things. So especially when some of these scary things happen, just trying to kind of stay on routine as much as possible so kids know that there are predictable things that are happening and coming up for them. And then limiting media exposure. And I know that this can be a tricky one because at times, you may be walking somewhere and they've got the news on and they're talking about some terrible thing that's happened, and your kid sees it and it's like, what's that? Is that going to happen to me? So just kind of being mindful and intentional where you can. So when you have control over things, when you're making choices about what to have on TV, just things to think about, which you probably already are if you're here. And then we've got some roles of the schools and community. So, schools are a great way to kind of have predictable routines, have safe adults, have some potentially spaces to talk, thinking about cultural responsiveness as well as a piece of this. Um, so it's not just you, it's the whole village, but everyone has a role to play in supporting kids through this for sure. So in summary, connection is more powerful than any script. Your calm presence, your openness, that matters more than finding the perfect words. Thinking about bringing it back to like, I'm here, I'm listening, we can face this together. That is going to be a very powerful thing to share with your child. So I know that these webinars really fly by. I wanted, you'll have access to the slides. And so I wanted to kind of put in a couple different resources that might be helpful. And I wanted to highlight that our next conversation will be with Dr. Evan Anderson about screen time in kids. So that'll be a nice like offshoot from this one. And I'm sure there'll be some similar things. Here's the QR code to register and look at past recordings. And of course, if there are any mental health emergencies, we have some good resources to help with some of those things. Some good general mental health resources. And then some other resources as well. And then before we jump into the Ask Me Anything, I know that there's a QR code here if you could answer questions about today's talk. And I also wanted to share, I should have put this in the slides, but this is like my favorite book. I can put it in the chat maybe or something about kind of going through how we have conversations around some of these scary topics. It's called When the World Feels Like a Scary Place, Essential Conversations for Anxious Parents and Worried Kids, and it's by Abigail Gurwitz. I love it because in this book, there are actual like conversations that you might have with your kids, things about COVID, things about why are the polar bears dying, all kinds of different things that I feel like could come up. So this book is a great resource.